afternoon, everyone. Danielle Bélanger here from the Cote-Saint-Luc Public Library, joining you virtually with some special guests today to speak about the Saint-Pierre River. So it should be an interesting talk. The talk will begin with Justin Bur, who's up on the screen over here. He is Canada Research Chair in Urban Heritage. Welcome. Thank you, Justin, for being here. We also have City Councillor Stephen Erdelyi, who will say a few words. Thank you, Stephen, for joining us. And we also have Louise Legault, who is from Friends of Meadowbrook Park. Enjoy the lecture, and we will begin now with Justin's portion, and we'll leave some time for a question period at the end. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Let me just clarify that I'm not actually the holder of the research chair. I am a doctoral student at UQAM, associated with the chair in urban heritage, but also with the Laboratory for Montreal History. So let me start my presentation now. There we go. And excuse me. Okay. So there we are. A brief. I'm going to go back and give the origins of how this river was from the beginning of time, when the French first discovered it. Of course, that's not quite the beginning of time. The First Nations were certainly knew about it and certainly used it because it was extremely useful as a way of getting around the Lachine Rapids. Just briefly, here we have a list of various interesting sources that I've used in understanding how this river works. Some of them I think are well known, others not so well known. In particular, I will talk about Valérie Mahot, who was a postdoc researcher at Université de Montréal a few years ago, and who did a wonderful mapping of all the river systems of the island, so a very useful resource. When trying to understand the Saint-Pierre, Pauline Desjardins' UDM PhD thesis from 1999 is also essential, and she goes back to quote some researchers from the 1930s associated with the Sulpicians, who are the main authors of its transformations. And more recently, the Concordia Ethnography Lab has created a very interesting website called Ghost River, and specifically about this river and its current state, mostly ghostly, of course, hidden in the sewers. Occasionally there's some misconceptions on their site, but basically it's a lot of really good observations, and it's a really beautiful site to look at, so definitely worth looking at. And then a bunch of other things here. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you may remember, if you were around interested in rivers, between 2009 and 2012, there was a blogger called Andrew Aymon, and he wrote Under Montreal. He used to go exploring in the sewer system and also talked about the relationship between it and the sewers. And then the film Lost Rivers came out in 2012. Michel Dagenet's book from 2011 is useful, but only for the 19th century and afterwards. She doesn't go back into the French regime. And then I have at the end two more references about the sewer system, which are very helpful. So when Valérie Mahot arrived, she presented with great fanfare this fabulous 3D model that they actually manufactured out of cardboard of the island of Montreal. And that was the introduction to this research project that wanted to understand the relief of the island of Montreal, to try and figure out just where the rivers had been. And although they started out perhaps a little bit confused and mixed up, by 5 years later, by the time they finished the project, they had really worked out a very helpful resource. And one of the inspirations, I suppose you might say, or one of the historical documents that was used at the time, that was around to look at, was this map from the 1930s or 40s done by architect and all-around curious person, Aristide Beaugrand-Champagne. The problem was, although he was an all-around just curious person and very good at architecture and many other subjects, he wasn't good at figuring out the way water systems work. And so if you look at this map, it looks really weird with its strange puddles scattered around the island, giving birth to a whole bunch of streams. That's not actually the way water systems work. They don't merge and branch like subway systems either. They come from different spots, they come together in confluences, and then they tend to go straight to a single outlet. And that point will come up rather importantly in a moment. Anyway, Valérie Mahot's team redid the map, and so they produced this version of their research, just to you know, as a nod of the hat to Beaugrand-Champagne in the style of his map. And this is a much more accurate picture of what things really did look like before all the anthropogenic modification of the water systems on the island. Now here's Mount Royal. Here on the west of it, this is the St. Pierre system. This big fluffy white thing is the marshy lake that is properly known as St. Pierre Lake. The problem is, of course, that name overlaps with the bigger and more important Lac Saint Pierre halfway to Trois-Rivières. And so in recent times, people have tended to call it Lac à la Loutre, even though that is historically dubious. In any case, there's this big marshy section. Today, it's the Turcotte interchange and a lot more, the Lachine Canal basin. And then you'll notice that the thing comes out here in front of Nuns Island at the intersection point of Verdun and Point St. Charles. So that is the real St. Pierre. Now, let's concentrate on things a little more clearly. I have done some cartography on my own, taking up the data from Valérie Mahou's project. The dashed red line is the drainage basin, so the watershed of only of the St. Pierre and also of the downtown Little River system that flows out through Pointe-à-Calière. As the Little River and the St. Pierre River are often confused, it's useful to start out from this point of noticing that they are two separate watersheds, that all of this area, which includes Cote-Saint-Luc and Montreal West and a good chunk of Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, I'll show you the political divisions shortly, it all comes together and used to flow out into the St. Lawrence just here. And then this other system collected water from essentially from the mountain. Now, I have a nicer, this is a sort of the pristine state, but here's a nicer map that gives you at least some relief. The problem is that my data here is now contemporary data. So we've got Nuns Island, that's great, but notice here there's a difference between the old shoreline that I drew before and the current shoreline. So there's been an awful lot of landfill in the St. Lawrence, partly for flood control, partly for harbor expansion, partly for all sorts of other reasons. But even the shoreline in the St. Lawrence is no longer the same as it once was. And then if we start adding now features to make it easier to understand, because we'll be able to recognize them more, then here we are with the roads. These are the roads as they existed in about the middle of the 19th century. So the old rural roads. In particular, here's the Cote-Saint-Luc road. This one here is the original Upper Lachine Road, not the street that's currently called Upper Lachine Road. Most of this is actually called Saint-Jacques today, but its traditional name is either the Chemin du Coteau-Saint-Pierre or the Upper Lachine Road. On the other side of the main body of our St. Pierre River and its lake, we have the Côte-Saint-Paul Road, although most of it today is called St. Patrick Street. So they're the two old roads on either side of the valley of this river. And in between the two, as you recall, that's where that was the lake, the marshy expansion. Now here, for the first time, I've drawn the connection that was built by the Sulpicians at the turn of the 18th century. In the 1690s, 1700s, they actually connected the St. Pierre over to this water system, the watershed that runs out through Old Montreal. And we'll get to that in more detail in a moment. Let me just add though, as I'm adding more features, here are the railways. And you'll notice that the Grand Trunk, now the CN main line, comes right down the middle of the river valley on its way to the Victoria Bridge. Before that, the Montreal and Lachine Railway, which had started in close to the city of Montreal, what is now the corner of Peel and Saint-Jacques, more or less, it also ran through one river system over to the St. Pierre River system and out to Lachine. Railways in Montreal were really one of the major removals of their water courses, because a river valley is so convenient to put a railway down the middle of. And if it's marshy or difficult, just fill it in, why not? That was what they did in the 19th century. And then here's the same river system, the same watershed lines overlaid on the current map of West Central Montreal. Okay, so now the Sulpicians, who were of course responsible for the land allocation in the island of Montreal from the 1660s until the 1840s. They were the seigneurs of the island, and they had a responsibility to provide wind and water mills for milling grain. In fact, they had a monopoly on mills, which means they'd better have some good functioning mills for people to get their grain turned into flour. And one of their problems was that by the town, the city of Montreal, there was not enough water in that watershed. Whereas over here, we had quite a lot of water coming down through the St. Pierre system. There was also the thing that the St. Pierre system, I'll go back to it for a moment, without too many other things in the way. There we go. The St. Pierre system, here in the lower left of the screen is where the Lachine Rapids are. And if you come into the St. Pierre at Nuns Island and go up it in a canoe, which you could, you can come this close to Lachine before you have to do a very short portage to come out where the Lachine Canal actually comes out these days. So this was a very valuable route for getting around the rapids without having to do it on land. Of course, with the upper Lachine Road and also the lower Lachine Road down by the coastline, people did do it on land an awful lot, but it was nice to be able to go through water. And the Sulpicians already in the 17th century had the idea that it would be really nice to, not to bridge this gap, but to cut through this gap between the westernmost point of the St. Pierre before it starts moving up into the highlands, over to Lachine, well above the rapids. So if I go back then to the historical map, it's a historical map from 1700 more or less, and it shows the Grand Canal going from the lake, Lac Saint-Pierre, out to Lachine. This is not reality, this is wish, this is the hope, this was the project. And they tried to do it on a couple of occasions. And there were two main problems. One of them was that when you're cutting from one watershed to another watershed, there's usually a reason why the water doesn't already go there. That's right, because the watershed boundary is often sort of solid. And in this case, the watershed boundary was composed of rock. And they didn't have the technology and the manpower to cut through that rock in the 1680s, 1690s. So that was a big thing. The other thing was simply political and financial. Certain Sulpician leaders, superiors of the seminary, thought this was a really important thing to do and it was a priority, but they had to get approval from the powers that be in France. And the government thought this is a terrible waste of money to do some sort of obscure development in this faraway colony, and we just don't want to pay for it. So between those two things, the Sulpician-Lachine Canal connection was never built. On the other side of the lake, on the other side of the St. Pierre Lake, they had a different problem, which I just mentioned a moment ago, the problem that the mills near the city didn't have enough water. And here's another map. Now, this is from 1733. This was drawn by Chaussegor de Léry, the rather celebrated military engineer known for having built the fortification wall around Montreal. And he also drew various attractive maps showing essentially the old city and its fortifications, but also this one showing the plans, not just for the canal over on the Lachine side, the one that never got done, but also for waterworks over here, connecting the St. Pierre Valley in its, I wasn't expecting that. Oh, there we go. The St. Pierre Valley in its lower reaches into the upper reaches of the system that flows out through Old Montreal. Thereby, and actually this little text here is explaining how by cutting the canal here and taking the water up to here, this point right here beside the city is marked M for mill, and that's where there was a water mill that didn't have enough water to run very efficiently. So, and now we're back to my cartography, which and this is, okay, the French maps from the 1700s are not all that precise. This is very precise to the extent that we can know where things are, and we have pretty good maps, especially. This is mostly traced on a very detailed topographical map of 1869, and therefore it's pretty reliable. And we can see then that at this point in the St. Pierre Valley, a connection was made, and this thing here that's labeled Canal San Gabriel was the canal through the Sulpicians, what they called the Domaine San Gabriel. A domain was a part of the seigneurial territory that was reserved for the seigneur rather than being handed off to a farmer or another landowner. And on their domain, the Sulpicians themselves had agricultural activity. And of course, they had full control of the land there, so they could build this canal. They found the canal useful not just to bring the St. Pierre water into this river that beautifully happens to flow towards the city and the mill. There's the mill marked just here. But they also found that the canal was a very useful irrigation trough. And also, this canal was easy to build because it was in the soft soil of their domain, not in the rock leading to Lachine. So when we talk about the French plans for St. Pierre, it's important to distinguish between the failed attempt to get an outlet at Lachine and the rather successful attempt to bring the St. Pierre's waters through the Sulpician domain at St. Gabriel into the water system that flows out to Old Montreal. Now, just before I leave this map, because I've got some modern incursions on here as well. This here, of course, is the Lachine Canal as it was built, starting in 1825. So here we are, quite some, a good quarter century. What am I saying? A good century and a quarter later, when the British have taken over, when technology has improved a lot, when the need to have a proper ship canal between Montreal proper and the other side of the rapids is much more present. And that canal was built also in the St. Pierre system. And so it ends up being the much later realization of the dreams of the Sulpicians. Now, right here, where the Lachine Canal crosses the St. Pierre River, it was actually necessary for the canal builders in 1825 or 1824 actually, but anyway, in the 1820s, to build a tunnel for the river under the Lachine Canal. You can't just have two waterways crossing like that without the risk of all sorts of undesirable effects, notably erosion. And the St. Pierre was renowned for its spring floodwaters. It was something that wouldn't necessarily flow all that heavily all year round, but in the spring, there was a lot of water there. And so when the huge torrents came down the St. Pierre one spring during the construction of the Lachine Canal, the builders realized that there's no way they could keep their canal wall intact if they didn't put that river underneath the canal. So there's perhaps the first canalization, the first putting of the St. Pierre underground. Same thing happened on the other side. Here we are after the Sulpician deviation, and now we're on this upstream tributary of the Little River in downtown Montreal, and it also had to be passed through a tunnel under the Lachine Canal. And then one more thing, this other canal here was another, just a generation after the Lachine Canal. In the 1850s, it's the Waterworks Canal, what we call today the Canal de l'Aqueduc, so the same name. Right here, this gap is the water treatment plant, still there today, although the current building dates from the 1930s rather than the 1850s. And that brings then fresh St. Lawrence River inland far enough to a place from which it was possible to construct a water pipe, pump the water up towards reservoirs on the mountain underneath Atwater Avenue. Atwater Avenue, by the way, was not named because it has a main water pipe underneath it, but rather because the man in charge of the waterworks had the extremely appropriate name of Atwater, one of those things that seems predestined. In any case, so here's the water coming in, the water gets filtered, it gets pumped up to the reservoirs, and any leftover water had to get sent back out. And so that's what you call a tail race, the outflow of a canal, of the wastewater, if you like. Although there were plans initially to bring it out into Montreal Harbor, it was decided to take the quicker, shorter way straight down to a point, not exactly the same as the original mouth of the St. Pierre River, but very close to it. And so there we have another confusion. Now, the consequences of all this for the St. Pierre, okay, here's a more, a clearer view of all these things that I've just talked about. the tunnels, the two tunnels under the Lachine Canal, the point of diversion where the Sulpicians stole the water from the St. Pierre to send it into their stream off to the city. I marked Chaboyer Square because this is an old, hardly exists anymore. It's mostly an entrance away and an out ramp from the Ville Marie autoroute. But in any case, just beside the old planetarium, Notre Dame Street near the École de Technologie Supérieure and all of that stuff, there was a place. It tended to flood a lot. It's the place where a lot of natural rivers came together, including the branch from the St. Pierre system. And then the outflow from that goes straight through Old Montreal, where, of course, in the 1820s and 30s, that also was put into an underground pipe under what is now Place Duville. And then over here, we see the difference between the natural mouth of the St. Pierre and the tail race, which has the leftover. So, I mean, once the Sulpicians diverted the river at this point, we can assume that the original outflow of the St. Pierre probably didn't have a whole lot of water left in it. I mean, it's a little bit like what is destined to happen in Meadowbrook now, that the upstream rivers are being sent off somewhere else. And so the downstream bit that remains is just going to drain this small piece of land. As it happens, it has another affluent coming from here, basically from Anguignon Park. So this, I mean, today, if I show you, here's the map of things today. The natural mouth is a park strip in Verdun. There's no water running on the surface, but it's still a green space because it is actually a former river valley. Okay, that's it for drawings. I wanted to make a few more comments about the overall destiny then of the river in its different forms. In particular, once the Sulpicians made their diversion and sent most of the water towards Old Montreal, and this happened at the very beginning of the 18th century, so in the early 1700s, and they were able then with that to run the mill. The mill was located on what is now St. Paul Street, west of McGill Street. So we're outside Old Montreal, but we're just in that little part there. You can see it here on the map, how it was. It's not quite the St. Joseph suburb, which is along Notre Dame Street. It's not the St. Anne suburb, which is Griffintown, right? It's the space in between. And the reason it was a space in between is because it was a damp spot full of St. Pierre River and Little River, I mean, full of rivers. And this mill. The mill was functional for about a century, from about 1709 to 1804, so just under a century actually. It wasn't great as things go because, well, we're in Montreal, things freeze a lot in the wintertime. And as I said, the flow, even coming from the St. Pierre, wasn't always a great amount of flow, but it was enough at least to make the mill viable for a century. And of course, it wasn't the only mill. There were windmills all over the island. There were other mills on Mill Street near the port of Montreal is named because that was also a location where there were some windmills. And so one of many mills in the system, but one that actually worked for a century. Now, with this diversion, with most of the water of the St. Pierre heading towards Old Montreal, the Little River, which is only called the Little River in the earliest documents, Maisonneuve and the Sulpicians in the early days only referred to the Little River, but by the middle and the late 18th century, once people get used to the idea that the St. Pierre ends up there, the names get merged. And so we start talking about the Petite Rivière Saint-Pierre or the Little St. Pierre River. So don't use that term if you're talking about anything before 1700, but admittedly, it's been, 300 odd years that the two systems have been merged together and that the old original outflow of the St. Pierre is not really functional anymore. So I understand grudgingly why Pointe-à-Callière Museum, back when they were being founded in 1992, decided that they were going to use the term Petite Rivière Saint-Pierre in all their publications and all their exhibits, even though I would argue that that's when they're talking about the founding of Montreal, they're committing an anachronism there, since that merger of the systems happened some 60 odd years after the founding of Montreal. And of course, it's also important if you are thinking of the we can talk of a natural pristine state of the watercourses on the island, then of course the St. Pierre does not flow out into Old Montreal. But anyway, the Sulpicians, they did a lot of things to create our landscape the way it is today, and that's one of them. Even if there's very little visible of this anymore, and in fact, today it's the street whose name I can't read here in Point St. Charles, which runs basically on the line of the old canal. And then finally, what about the rest of the system? If now, when I showed the map with the railways, actually this one will do. Let's use the map with the current map underneath. I've drawn Meadowbrook here. Meadowbrook, of course, is leftover land from when the Canadian Pacific Railway was buying their right-of-way through here. They were bringing together several rail lines. One, the original CP rail line coming from St. Jerome through Milan to the East End, and then the line from their St. Lawrence River Bridge from 1885, which came through here like this to join the initial line at Outremont. And then finally, with the creation of a new line along the West Island, paralleling the existing Grand Trunk, now CN line. That's why we have CN and CP together, because the CP arrived, 20 odd years later and put their tracks parallel. And that came through here as well. So lots of railway junctions, mostly belonging to the CP, with some connection with some CN tracks as well. And of course, that line there allowed the opening of Windsor Station in 1889. And then, of course, they had this leftover land that they decided to make into a golf course. And that's pretty much where we are today, except that it having been sold to another developer in between. And there are three branches of the St. Pierre that cross over that space. One major tributary, which is not visible on the surface though, and then one other minor tributary, and then of course the main body of the river draining Cote-Saint-Luc and a good part of NDG. And that's the part that is currently under discussion, because the point is that the city wants to take, well, doesn't want to. The court has told the city to no longer allow the outflow from the sewer system that replaced this branch of river to come out into the open through the golf course anymore, even though that's supposed to be a storm sewer, because that storm sewer water is contaminated with cross connections from the sanitary sewer system. And so and then just on the other side of Meadowbrook, the lower reaches here have long since disappeared into the sewer system, and so it just goes back into pipes. Already with the creation of the Lachine Canal in the 1820s, the St. Pierre system became sort of almost redundant as far as a drainage thing was concerned. With the lower reaches over here had already been taken away by the Sulpicians in the early 1700s. So we're down to this being the last surviving part of the St. Pierre River system. And that's why we are hoping that someday, in the not too distant future, this can be properly revived, at least for this part here. As for how this part got into the sewer in the first place, it's simply because of suburban development starting in the 1950s meant that the old farmland here was being built on. And of course, when you build houses on farmland, you have to get the water out of the way. At least that's the way it was done for all of the second half of the 20th century. And that's very hard to undo now. So on that note, I think I will stop here. If there are questions, I will be happy to take them later on, but I have to pass the microphone on to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Justin. I have to say, well, first of all, I'll introduce myself. I'm Stephen Erdelyi, one of the city councilors, councilor for District 4. So I have to say, I learned quite a lot from your presentation. So I appreciate that. And I will try to continue where you left off. I'm just going to set up my screen. Hopefully that works. So where I will focus on is the modern issue that we're dealing with the cross connections that has led to the situation now where we have some, there appears to be some sewage that has entered the St. Pierre River. So I'll start just by focusing again on the section of the St. Pierre River, and this is the last, let's say, remaining portion that cuts through the southern part of Meadowbrook Golf Course. And I'll give a bit more background on the types of sewer pipes that we have in Cote-Saint-Luc, and this is true for most of the island of Montreal. So in Cote-Saint-Luc and in the island of Montreal, there's two systems. In Cote-Saint-Luc, in the northeast section, they have what's called a combined sewer. So this is a sewer where it collects the water that is runoff from the road, but also the sewage that comes from your toilets and so on. And in certain other parts, and actually the majority of Cote-Saint-Luc in the west and the south, and this is where we have the issue, we have two separate systems, so two separate parallel systems. So you can see here, we have a sanitary pipe or domestic pipe, and this collects the household waste water, and then we have the storm water that is collecting the rainfall that lands on the street. And I'll show you how this works out in Cote-Saint-Luc. So if you could see the areas in blue, so these the areas in blue are where you have the two separate systems that are parallel. And the area in pink is where we have a combined system. And again, this is leading to the section of the St. Pierre River that passes through Meadowbrook. And you could see this line, and I'll show you on the next slide, just focusing on that. This is a line that cuts through Cote-Saint-Luc. And so I'll show you here. So this line again is collecting stormwater from this section, which is Cote-Saint-Luc District 3, which is the district of my fellow councillor Dida Berku, who's I believe on the Zoom, and also District 4, which is the district I represent. And it also, if you could see the black and white dotted line, that's the border between Cote-Saint-Luc and Montreal West. So part of this line is actually on the border and in Montreal West. So it collects some of the stormwater from Montreal West as well. And all of that goes to, or was until recently, going through the former St. Pierre River through Meadowbrook. Now, what is the issue? The issue is, if you can imagine, this is a cross section of an average street. So just as an example, so you could see the red pipe is the sanitary, and the sort of bluish purple is the stormwater. You can't see all the numbers here, it's a bit small, but these two pipes are both 30 centimeters in diameter, roughly a foot in diameter. In this case, the sanitary was built in 1954, the stormwater was built in 1958. They're running parallel under the street. And what's happened, and I'll lead to the causes in a moment, what happens is, on occasion, when someone is doing work, because they're two parallel pipes, and they're not necessarily paying attention to detail, they connect to the wrong pipe. And that is the situation we've seen. And I'll give some scenarios, and these are 4 scenarios, although there's some overlap. The first one is where the pipe, the household stormwater pipe, or the residential sewer pipe was connected by mistake to the stormwater pipe. So this is when the house was built. Most of the homes in the district were built in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So at that point, it was incorrectly connected. The second scenario is when there was some renovation. The pipe was upgraded for whatever reason, and instead of connecting it to the correct one, it was connected to the stormwater by mistake. The third one, which we've seen on occasion, is where someone does a renovation, but instead of using the existing pipe, they actually add a second pipe. So they do an extension to the house, and they add a second connection, but that second one is connected to the stormwater instead of the sanitary sewer pipe. And the last one, which is a rare one, but we've seen some examples, is where the two pipes, rather than being side by side, one is actually above the other. And in the case where the stormwater sewer pipe is above the rainwater, I'm mixing it up, where the sanitary pipe is above the stormwater. If you can imagine, some of the waste could leak out of that pipe. And if both pipes are cracked, and as mentioned, most of these pipes are built in the 50s, Over time, there are some cracks that develop. So what we've seen in some occasions where some of the sewage has leaked out of the sanitary pipe, and we believe it may have entered into the stormwater pipe because they're, again, parallel with one just above the other. Now, what have we done about this? So I have to admit there was some delay in terms of responsibility, but starting in 2018, the city of Cote-Saint-Luc hired a contractor called CMO, which is the company that manages our water system, and they tested approximately 16 kilometers of pipe. That included pipes in District 3 and 4, 53 roads, and 1,243 buildings. And what they did was they released a harmless smoke, an inert smoke, into the stormwater sewer. So you had one person releasing the smoke, you had another technician who was observing the homes in the area. In every home, there is a toilet vent on the roof. You probably don't even notice it, but when researching, I looked at my own house, and it's often a silver or metallic cylinder. Sometimes there's a cap on it, but basically they release a harmless smoke, and then they look around at the homes, and if they see the smoke exiting, then they know that it is a possible cross connection. And just to mention, before we do these tests, we inform all the residents. A letter was sent out to all the homes. So again, if there's smoke, it means that a cross connection is highly likely, and a secondary test is required. So this first round of testing is simple. It can be done outside. They don't have to enter your home. For the second round, they do what's called a dye test. So what the city does is they take a harmless dye. It could be a blue dye or red, different colored dyes are available. They put it into one of the toilets in the house, flush the toilet, and there's another technician, again, who has a camera inside the stormwater system. And if they observe this dye, then they know that, in fact, there is a cross connection. So we did this, and originally we found that there were 2 duplexes with 4 addresses that were found to have a cross connection. And we did the testing. It cost about $30,000. Now, after those tests were done, Montreal ran some of their own tests, and they found a few extra addresses. So we weren't sure what the issue was. We ran a second round of testing. So this was done in 2020-21. So we found a few things. So we did find, in fact, that there were some errors on our part. We also found that Montreal themselves made some errors in that they tested some of the sanitary sewers. So because they were testing areas where it is only a combined sewer system, so we knew that there were some errors, but we also realized we had also made a mistake, and we found one. So we found the 2 duplexes, which were there originally. We found one apartment building, a small apartment building that we did not notice in the first round. And we also found actually one bathroom in a park. And this was a renovation that was done recently. And I have to admit, on the city's part, when the city was installing the toilet, they actually connected it to the stormwater, to the rainwater, instead of the sanitary sewer. That was corrected at a cost of approximately $16,000. So we corrected that right away as soon as we figured it out. In terms of next steps, so we're still waiting on, this, as of the last report, it was 4, but I believe it's actually even less. We're waiting, I believe now it's 2 or 3 homes or duplexes where the homeowner refused entry for the dye test because of COVID concerns. And this is something we've had over the last little while. Slowly residents are allowing the workers inside. So those should be solved very quickly, and we'll be able to finalize that. We also found, as I mentioned, the last case or last situation where a cross connection occurs, where the 2 pipes are parallel and there's leakage from one pipe to another. We found 3 sections of pipe where possible infiltration may have occurred. This was from doing tests. We put cameras and robots into the pipes to assess, and those are scheduled to be relined during the winter of 21-22. So usually when we do the sanitary or sewer pipes, we reline them in the winter because it's the easiest time to do that. So that should be done. And we also actually received a grant from the provincial and federal governments to do that. And then in terms of final steps, we're assessing the total cost for repair. So that's what we're doing now. We estimate for a home, the cost is about $7,000 to $10,000. For the apartment building, we estimate about $15,000 to $20,000. I mean, they have to actually do the work to see exactly where the cross connection has occurred. but those are rough estimates. And the goal, once we finalize this, is to have the repairs done as soon as possible. Now, the issue, as Justin mentioned, is we're dealing with a court system in Montreal where they have set up a temporary connection to remove or to stop the flow of the stormwater into the St. Pierre River. We hope to have it reconnected, and we're going to do what we can over the next few months to try to make that a possibility. But regardless, the goal of Cote-Saint-Luc is to continue to resolve the issues that are on our territory and to try to fix them as quickly as we can. So that's the end for me. I have to apologize in advance. I have to head out in a few minutes for an appointment. So I apologize if I won't be able to stay for the question and answers. But if anyone has any questions, you can always reach out to me by email at serdelyi@cote-saint-luc.org. And I know Councillor Berku is also here, so if there's any questions at the end, you can ask her as well. So I'll pass I'll stop sharing and pass the baton off to Louise. Thank you. I'll just answer that question quickly. The lead issue. So how does the lead issue impact any of this? So the lead, where we believe we may have some lead, is in the drinking water. So that's not in the. So I mean, as far as we're aware, there's no lead in the sewer pipes. But even if there is, it doesn't actually affect. It doesn't affect anything. But from our understanding, there is no lead in the sewer pipes. The lead is actually only in the section of the pipe that connects the water main to your house. So I would say the only issue where it could affect is financially, in that the city is focusing a lot of financial resources. In the long term, we expect the cost to repair the lead pipes to be in the millions and millions of dollars. So I would say financially, I would say that might be an effect, in that it means we're prioritizing fixing the lead issue. But in terms of the direct impact between the lead and the sewer, there's no connection there. So anyway, I'll let Louise go. And again, I apologize in advance that I have to jump off.
Hello, my name is Louise Legault. I'm a member of the board of Les Amis du Parc Meadowbrook. You're going to have to bear with me. I'm not a terribly technical person, so there might be a few glitches along the way. I must admit also that I'm reeling from the presentation we had from the City of Montreal yesterday afternoon. They explained what they intend to do on Meadowbrook to comply with the recent court order. Now, let me first back up a little to give you a bit of context. And this is where I'm going to try to share my screen with you. Okay. Next. Okay. So Les Amis du Parc Meadowbrook has been defending the Meadowbrook Golf Course since 1989. So that's been 32 years this August. Here you have here an aerial view of the golf course, or I hope you have it. Do you have it? No. Can you see the golf course?
Not yet, Louise. Maybe go one slide forward.
No, that is the one. The one I see is the golf course. The one that's okay. So well, let's drop the the slides. The hell with it. So I had an aerial view of the golf course from Cote-Saint-Luc. Okay, what we've done with Les Amis is we've managed to thwart, and I will close this thing. Voila. We've managed to thwart no less than 5 housing projects. We've also had the zoning changed in 2015, and it became green space recreation. That means that it's no longer possible to build on the on the golf course. Now, if you're not a golfer, chances are you might have never seen the river. It crosses the golf course on the Lachine side at Toblake Park. It's only 200 meters long, but it, of course, plays an essential role in the attractiveness of the area, but also in its ecology. So I mentioned a court case earlier. In fact, there have been quite a few. As far as the river is concerned, there was a first court decision in 2018 that ordered the city of Montreal to stop polluting the river. Good idea, right? But as Mr. Erdelyi just explained, it's a bit more complicated than that. Those cross connections have been contaminating the river for quite a while. And given the tight delays that the court gave the city of Montreal, they decided in 2020 to deviate the collector during dry periods only in an effort to reduce the pollution level. And as a result, the river is now dried out most of the time, except during snowmelt and if there's a downpour. There was a slide of the river, but I'm sorry, you're not going to see it. Now, the owner of the land, which is Groupe Pacifique, they appealed this first decision. And a new decision came down in January 2021. This time, it's any water, polluted or not, cannot flow onto the golf course. So in essence, this spells the end of the St. Pierre River as we know it. The little bit, that little section that's left, doesn't have much longer to go. You can imagine that when the decision fell, Les Amis du Parc Meadowbrook got into full battle mode, and we organized a letter campaign to Mayor Valérie Plante. She finally got back to us, and I quote, "The city of Montreal has no choice but to construct a water line to carry all of the water from the Toblake sewer from the northern boundary of Meadowbrook Golf Course to its southern boundary." We were also told that the work could begin as early as November 2021. That's 3 months to, you'll excuse my expression, turn the tide. Now, burying a river is the kind of solution that was taken in the 19th and 20th centuries. That way you could get rid of a river that had become a health hazard because of industrialization and urbanization. These days, cities around the world have come back full circle, and they're trying to daylight rivers to combat extreme heat episodes as well as flood episodes. Now, you only have to look at what happened in Europe this summer. You can see we need all the help we can get. Now that there's rivers naturally have advantages in surface water management. They are also beautiful. They add beauty to our world. And they also give access to nature, which is something we need more and more in our urbanized lives. If I can recommend something, I believe the Cote-Saint-Luc Library has the film Lost Rivers. And there's a number of examples of daylighting stories around the world in that film. It was actually done by a Montrealer, Caroline Bach. With that kind of news, we were wondering what to do. And we decided to take a page from the Equanichit Council in the lower North Shore, who had decided to adopt a declaration of legal personhood for the Magpie River. When we sort of looked at that, I mean, you have to admit that the Magpie is 200 kilometers long. and all that's left of the Saint Pierre is 200 meters. Okay? But it used to flow, you know, from Outremont to Verdun. Isn't it enough of a reason that there's only that 200 meters to try to keep it, okay, and protect it? This kind of initiative is part of the nature rights movement. It's based on indigenous principles that recognize the connection between mankind and the natural world. You also find these principles in major world religions and human rights. There's already 17 countries that have adopted similar principles. Like the song says, we're here for a good time, not a long time. And we should make sure that when we leave for those who follow us an environment in which they can survive. We're well aware, okay, that this has no chance of flying in our courts. Our declaration is more a political and an educational tool. And we hope that similar initiatives will be taken to protect other urban rivers in Montreal. They've all suffered greatly and they need a helping hand. Now, the declaration has 9 rights to the river. I had a number of slides to show them to you, so I won't go through the whole thing. We don't have that much time anyways. So there's, you know, the right to exist to start with, and it's the very existence of the river that's at stake here. There's the right to flow. Well, in a couple of months' time, it won't be flowing anymore. Right now, it's just, the riverbed is exposed. It's just rocks and puddles. There's freedom from pollution. We all know, we all know that part of the story. And there's a number of others, culminating with the 9th one, which is the right to defend himself in court. Now that's, you know, the more litigious one. Our present legal system is based on a vision of nature that sees nature as a resource, something to be exploited. Well, you just have to look around and we know that where that has taken us. So it's going to be a while before these kind of principles are adopted in the courts here. As Mr. Bur said earlier, the city of Montreal, basically what they will be doing in the fall is digging up the golf course. Notice that they've waited until the fall, and they're going to put down a pipe where the rainwater collector will flow. In essence, I mean, the court decision didn't take the river into consideration, and neither does this solution. What happens to the river isn't their problem. It's that simple. So it doesn't look very good, but we haven't given up the fight just yet. In a way, I mean, we're going to turn every stone over until the shovels are in the ground. And it's a Shiva that we have to organize. So if you are interested, you can drop us a line at lesamisdemeadowbrook@gmail.com and possibly support our declaration and become guardians of the river and its rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Louise, and thank you, Justin, so much for your informative talk. Dida, did you want to say something as well?
Hi, hi. Sorry, I had turned off my camera. I didn't want to be distracting for the viewers. So thank you, Justin. I really appreciate the talk. I learned a lot. And we're always learning more and more about the St. Pierre River. So unfortunately, we're in the situation we're in, but I do appreciate the history lesson. And we give Jane's walks once a year. So don't be surprised if we call upon you to help us out with one of our Jane's walks, because you have a lot of information about Cote-Saint-Luc that is very, very useful and very informative for our residents. That's number one. And Louise, of course, I do appreciate everything that you've been doing. We know exactly what we heard yesterday. I told you this 4 months ago when we had the meeting with the city of Montreal, that this was what they were going to do. They don't want to be in contempt of court. They are very concerned about the court decision because they were ordered to do something within a certain period of time. It's 18 months and time is running out on them. But as I said yesterday, I'm still hopeful because all is not lost. We are still working diligently at the city to defend the city. The city is still being pursued for $20 million. And that lawsuit has not yet gone to trial. And the city of Montreal is being pursued as well. The Groupe Pacific is contesting what they call the schéma d'aménagement, the master plan, and that has also not gone to trial. But at the end of November, there will be motions presented to the Superior Court asking that both these cases be dismissed, rejected, because on their face, the city of Montreal and the city of Cote-Saint-Luc feel that these cases are prima facie unfounded and should be, at this point, given all that's transpired to date, they should be dismissed. Now, if that works, that'll be very, very good. However, again, I say all is not lost because right now we have the schéma d'aménagement, the master plan of the island of Montreal, which basically has designated, I won't use the word zoning, but has designated Meadowbrook as a green recreational space for golf, for tennis, for baseball, for anything the recreational. And there are many opportunities that the developer could take advantage of. If he's listening, which sometimes he is when we have these podcasts and these things. So there are other things that could be done on the golf course, not just a residential development. So we continue. And I do appreciate the library hosting this podcast, and I hope that it's recorded so we can share it with others who are also interested in this very important subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Dida. Yes, this will be recorded, and I would like to just open the floor now for anyone listening in who has questions for either Justin or Louise to please put them either in the chat or the Q&A, and I will read them out. Okay, so we have one from Allison Hackney. Is there a recording of the Montreal presentation yesterday? So I'll let you tackle that one, Louise. Oh, Louise, your microphone is off.
I must admit, I don't know. We will be looking into it. I've been to other similar sessions and they were recorded. This is Allison Hackney, is that?
Yes, exactly, Louise. Allison
Okay,
Hackney.
we can get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you. If anyone wants to raise their hand, we can also do it that way if you don't like using the chat or the Q&A. So I'll just keep my eyes on these three options. Okay, so Allison would like to speak. Allison, I'm going to try to allow you to speak. You'll just have to unmute yourself, please, and you can ask your question.
Hello, Louise. Hello, Dida. Do you hear?
Yes.
Okay. I might have missed some parts, but I gather that it has to do with Steve's presentation and that the effluent from the cross connections is going into the St. Pierre River. And anyway, so they have to clean the pollution, but couldn't they do that by fixing the cross connections instead of by wrecking the river?
Well, I mean, in 2018, there was a first decision to stop the pollution, okay? And what the city did was deviate temporarily to give Cote-Saint-Luc and Montreal West, to a certain extent, some time to find and repair these cross connections, okay? But well, it seems that the court was not satisfied with the solution. The decision was appealed, and this new decision is a question of no water, polluted or not. So that's why they now have to, well, they've chosen to, like they say very wisely, we're not canalizing the river, we're canalizing the collector. So we're not touching the river. So, I mean, I suppose that's one way of getting your certificate of authorization from the environmental ministry, isn't it? Does that answer your question? I know it's complicated.
Yeah, it's not their problem. Thanks.
Thank you for your question.
I wouldn't say it's not their problem. I would say if you look at the court cases and all their proceedings, I mean, they tried their very best to resolve the issue. I have to say to their credit, but the Ministry of the Environment did not defend the river. The courts did not, the judges did not understand the significance of the river. And the last judgment was absolutely a shocker, because not only do they not want the pollutants to come in, they don't want water to enter. And that is the ultimate, that it's not only that to stop the pollutants from coming onto the Meadowbrook grounds, but stop all water. And that's where I think the judgment really was erroneous. But the courts were adamant to the point that they ordered the city to pay for the legal fees and to pay for court costs, and to, you know, they considered their position to be almost frivolous. So the city of Montreal had no more choice. They exhausted all their options. In the meantime, City of Cote-Saint-Luc and Montreal West were trying to clean it up. But as you can see from Stephen's presentation, and every time I see Stephen's presentation, it really reminds me more and more of this, that even if clean up all the cross connections that we can find, we're still not going to be 100% sure that there won't be some other contaminants coming in from somewhere else, right? It's not like an exact science that we're going to find 2 duplexes, 1 building and 1 toilet somewhere, and that's going to clean it all up. No, there might still be something coming in from somewhere else. So it's a little bit murky, if you excuse the pun. You know, it's not so clear that that water's, that waste, the storm water is always going to be crystal clean. And the court doesn't want any water, and that's the problem. The problem is with that decision that no water is allowed on the Meadowbrook.
So Dida, I see a question from the audience from Deanne Delaney, and the question is, who decided if it was water or a river entering Meadowbrook?
No, it's not. I don't say it's in the judgment. Like Louise correctly stated, the first judgment said to stop the pollutants from going into the St. Pierre, what they call the le lit du ruisseau that's in the Meadowbrook. But the Court of Appeal judgment went even further. It's not just to stop the pollutants, but it's to stop all water, whether it's river, clean water, dirty water, all water from going into the Meadowbrook. That's the issue that the city of Montreal is facing. And that's why they don't want to be held in contempt of court.
Okay, so it's the city of Montreal who is,
No, it's not the city of Montreal.
No?
It's the Court of Appeal du Québec that made that judgment based on the arguments he were hearing from both sides. Because Groupe Pacific said, we don't want any water. Polluted, not polluted, we don't want any water. Clean, dirty, half clean, we don't want it. And the court went along with that.
Okay, because that was Deanne's question, but it really is the Court of Appeal.
Correct,
Who has decided this.
right.
Okay.
And we were both shocked. Louise and I were reading it and was like, we couldn't believe it. And that's.
Oh, Dida froze for a moment. Louise, if you want to fill in, if you think you know the end of what Dida was about to say, I will let you, of course.
No, I don't really.
No. Okay, and so to follow up on this, Allison is asking, what could the MELCC have done? Sorry, it's not me.
That could be a very long answer. But basically, I mean, they deliver a certificate of authorization. Okay. The city of Montreal has asked for the certificate back in May. It has not been delivered yet. As I said, I figure that they will be saying, well, we're not touching the river. You know, we're just burying the interceptor, that the collector, that's all. The fact that, you know, I mean, they will also be changing the flow of the river is a
Sorry,
little bit.
my internet got disconnected, sorry.
You want to finish?
No, I'm done. I'm okay, I'm done, thank you.
Okay, I have a question for you after. So where was I? What could the MELSC? But I mean, you have to consider that they did give them a certificate of authorization to deviate for the work they did in 2020, at the beginning of 2020, and that dried the river up practically. So what could the Ministère de l'Environnement have done? Your guess is as good as mine.
So I noticed that Justin had put in the chat that in the short term, the cross connections can't be fixed fast enough with the court judgment. In the longer term, there's hope to find a more satisfactory resolution. The issue is not over. Justin, how can you and your work help Louise and Dida and the fight in this?
I suppose the main thing is just raise awareness. I mean, that's what the historical point of view is, just to add significance to the river itself, and to but I mean, the whole movement to daylight rivers and to protect wetlands from encroachment and from drying up is the most powerful argument really for getting this resolved properly. And so anything in that way, I don't know, I wonder, one thing I wonder about this Court of Appeal decision is why there's so much urgency. Yes, the dossier has been going on for a long time, but how was Groupe Pacific able to demonstrate that they needed to have a solution so fast that the court wasn't going to consider that the fact that work was already being done, and you know, that feet are not being dragged in this issue? It's just that it's complex and long to get it done. So it seemed, as others have said, I find that the decision itself is of dubious merit, but since it wasn't appealed to the Supreme Court, then it stands. And but anyway, the thing is that whatever environmental harm happens now, if the river can be, sorry, if the sewer problems can be fixed, and later on some agreement made to bring the outflow of the storm sewer back into the riverbed, then the environmental situation will recover. I would hope, and I would think. And so the point now is just to make, sort of like when you lose a railway line because there's no traffic on it, but you know that it's a valuable transportation facility, you sort of mothball it, wait for the time to be better, and then make sure that in the meantime, nothing happens to ruin it, and then bring it back and make good use of it, let it thrive once the conditions have changed. So I would just keep hope, keep faith that this is a low point, but it's not the end, and that there will be future times, especially with what I've heard of the enthusiastic, not enthusiastic, rather the determined support from the people in the city of Montreal and the city of Cote-Saint-Luc, as well as the citizens, of course, and the community groups. So I don't think this is the end of things.
Thank you very much. Can I just add to that? Can I share my screen?
Yes, go ahead, Dida.
Okay, so this is a river that was revived in Berkeley, California. I shared this when I was there a few years ago. I think the picture is too big, huh? I don't know how to make it smaller. But if you see, what you see here is a small little river. You even see the house, there's the back of a house. And when I was in Berkeley visiting my daughter a couple of years ago, I saw this river. And so I looked into it and I said, well, what's the story behind this? And I found out that the University of Berkeley took it, there was a movement in Berkeley, and they took it upon themselves to really clean up a storm sewer similar to our situation that was completely polluted, and to revive the river, this little river that runs through Berkeley. And they did it. It happened. What happened, with the support of citizens and city and, the university community and so on and so forth. And now you have this lovely little river running through the parks and sort of local green spaces. It's not huge, but it's clean and available and free for people to enjoy. So when I saw that, I said, look, this is not, our situation is not the only one. I mean, there are other cases that are similar. And Justin, you can look into this case in Berkeley and see how that was done. So I think that I still am holding out hope. I know it is a low point, I agree. It should never have come to this, but politics and legal justice and courts and lawyers, yeah, they sometimes get in the way of of what needs to get done. So we have to keep going.
Thank you, Dida, for sharing that. I see another question popped up in the Q&A, so maybe we'll just take this last question from Tammy Halpern, who is asking, what's to stop Pack from backfilling in the 200 meters?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Right now, the only thing, I don't know, but I mean, that would be just a pure vengeance, like pure vindictive behavior. I would hope that they wouldn't do that. You know what's interesting? If you look at their project, the Saint-Pierre River project, La Petite Rivière, they called it, I think Louise will correct me, but they called it the project, the residential project was called La Petite Rivière. And it looked like, Venice in a golf course, like they were building homes along a riverbed. And that was the main feature of their residential project, was the river. So I don't know, they're still on that project, or if they change their mind, but it would be very vindictive. I mean, certainly wouldn't be of any use to the golf course to fill it up. And that right now it's being used as a golf course, so.
Okay, so Tammy, we are hoping that it won't go that way, and we're remaining optimistic. And as you've heard Justin, Dida, and Louise all say, the fight isn't over. And you can reach out to Les Amis de Meadowbrook. If you didn't get that Gmail address that I put in the chat, you can always contact the librarian with any other questions, and we'll make sure that your question gets to the correct person. So thank you very much, Justin Bur. Thank you, Louise Legault. Thank you, Dida. Thank you, Stephen, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you to the
Thank you.
library, and thank you, Danielle. Great job. Thank you very
Thanks
much.
very much.